Hey, welcome everyone. Thanks for being here today. We're going to give it a minute or two. We have lots of folks joining, so once we have most people trickled in, we will get started. But while we're waiting, everyone, please love to hear from you, where you're posting from. If you're posting from some tropical area, please post that, what the weather's like where you are. In the meantime, we're going to just kind of kick things off in a minute or two. And I'm here in New York. It's about 50 degrees today, partly cloudy, and little chilly. Ernesto, I think you told me it's a little warmer for you.
Yes, I'm in north of Atlanta. We're at 67 degrees today.
Awesome. All right. Well, post in the chat where you're from. Hopefully you're having a good weather day where you are. And at least it's not, it's middle of March in New York, could be snowing or something like that, I guess. But another few weeks, we won't have to worry about that. We have an exciting webinar today. It's a topic that, those don't necessarily think about third-party vendor risks. So we're really happy to be able to present this information to you so that you can learn about what that is and what you need to protect yourself. So we're super excited, and we'll give it another 30 seconds. So any good postings in the chat on where people are from, guys?
Someone posted it was from Dallas, Texas.
Awesome. Dallas, Texas. Yeah, I mean, I was there a few weeks ago, and it feels like -1, and it was very cold. Very, very cold. Not normal for Dallas, Texas. Oh my gosh, and wind and but now it's warmer today. So anyhow, we're not going to postpone this. We got 19 more seconds. Got a few more people trickling in, and then we're going to get started. Get this going. It's going to be action packed, and it's going to be informative for everyone. And we're really happy to be able to do it to you. Nash and I have done these before, not about vendor risk, but about others. So usually they're really great. We get good feedback on them. So without further ado, we're going to get started now. And those that are a little bit late will kind of miss the intro, but we got to kick things off for those that joined on time. All right. Thanks everyone for being here today. Right. So my name is Michael Glasser. I've been working in the computer industry with law firms, specifically cybersecurity, for 25 plus years. It's actually, before there was even consulting, I was consulting for the legal industry on that. I got a book I wrote a number of years ago on cybersecurity, #1 bestseller on Amazon. Happy to get a chance to meet the sharks and work with them and talk to them about different things over the years in different aspects, sometimes all at once and sometimes individually as well. So it's been awesome to do that as well. So Frontline, I'll tell you about them in a minute, but I'm going to actually Ernesto's going to introduce himself. How about you, Ernesto? Go for it.
Thank you, Michael. My name is Ernesto Negron. I am the Director of Security for Frontline Managed Services on the mid side, which is the Managed IT Services side. I've been in cybersecurity for over 25 years. I'm an active member at FBI InfraGuard, um, as well as do a lot of cybersecurity presenting. I consult to clients on cybersecurity initiatives and help with policies and procedures and so forth. And I'm the lead contact for any type of incidents for our clients.
Great. Thanks, Ernesto. Appreciate that. All right. So about Frontline Managed Services, Ernesto and I are talking today on the technology side. So we provide managed IT technology services, or everything from cybersecurity, which is Ernesto's specialty, and also not outsourced NOC operations, network operation centers, cybersecurity, back office operations as well, e-billing, electronic billing, managed accounts receivable services. On that side, we manage over $25 billion a year in collections and billings and e-billing for law firms throughout the world of all sizes, from small to mid-size to large size as well. So as well as help desk support, managed admin services. The help desk also is another big aspect of what we do. But today we're talking about technology and cybersecurity, how it can protect your firm. We're proud to be ISO compliant, soon to be SOC 2 compliant, and also ITAR compliant for those organizations that need that as well. So thanks everyone again for being here. We're excited to get started here today. So my first thing I'm going to say is please ask questions along the way. It's important. It's interactive that way for you. We'll get to a spot we'll answer those questions, but post them in the chat. You'll all be muted for the presentation. And look, we're going to talk today about understanding your vendor exploits, what that means, anatomy of a couple of different types of attacks, one being the Silk Typhoon, and the other one being Simple Help. We're also going to talk about how you can strengthen your firm's cybersecurity posture with regards to these third-party vendor risks. And we'll have a Q&A in closing and a couple of poll questions along the way. Keep it easy, keep it light, and keep it moving along. So today, why this matters. It's a growing blind spot for companies. You guys could read the three things there. We're not going to overwhelm you with slides today. Law firms, all law firms rely to some extent on third-party vendors for critical operations. I'll go over a few of those ways in a minute or two. Hackers are exploiting those vendor vulnerabilities to breach networks. So you might have the most robust security internally, but those third-party vendor exploits, if you don't manage them correctly, they actually could lead to an exploit, and they actually have in a lot of cases as well. Again, you can have your best security practice in place and still have that vendor risk. And then Ernesto's going to talk about some of those recent attacks in a technical manner, but we'll break it down in a non-technical way. How trusting vendor security without visibility is leaving the law firms vulnerable and exposed. And so that's the key. We don't want to leave law firms vulnerable and exposed. So look, here the key question for you guys is your firm truly protected from vendor-related cybersecurity threats? And so this is our poll question we're going to have right now. So do you guys, this just popped out now, do you have a well-defined vendor security program? Or do you know the risk but need a stronger strategy? Or you haven't really considered vendor risks until now? Or you don't know or you're unsure what your vendor security posture is? So let's take a second or two to talk about that. Ernesto, do you want to add anything while we're waiting for that poll to finish popping? Because we have a lot of people on today.
I think third-party vendor risk is something that is not intentionally ignored, but is not truly thought about because we have an inherent trust of people and of systems and software. And that's where, everything's developed by human nature. It's human developed software. And being a previous software developer, I kind of look at things a little bit differently. So, you write your own code, you write an application, and you may inadvertently have a bug in there which allows unauthorized access, unauthenticated access to your software that can inadvertently gain access to your systems. And those are the kind of things that I've seen an increase of questionnaires from cyber insurance companies as well as clients to law firms about their third-party risk management procedures and policies.
Right. We're seeing a big increase in those questions, especially on the client questionnaires. So what we're seeing is an uptick in clients, no matter what size they are. They could be a 20-person firm, and they're getting these client questionnaires about their security posture. And actually, these questionnaires are actually more in depth than maybe their own cyber insurance policies as well. And sometimes they're having their own IT person fill them out. And we don't necessarily recommend that. We recommend those being reviewed by an outside source who can then interview your current IT person and kind of go over that with you to make sure you're answering those questions correctly. Because if you answer those questions incorrectly, it could lead you to be exposed and lead to financial loss. We're going to go over now, actually, because sometimes people don't know what third-party vendors are. So we're going to go over a few of those right now because it's important to know there are many areas for risk exposure. So we've just highlighted some of them. The key is to go through and review all systems with the various vendors you work with and make sure to map them out. I don't know if you want to talk, Ernesto, about some of these things. Some people might not know what RMM is, and for a second or two.
Right. So the remote access management software. So you have these tools that facilitate help desk support, remote management of your servers, of your switches and your firewalls. So the RMM is listed first, remote access management tool, because that's been the number one target for bad actors. There's definitely been an uptick on the vendors that provide that software that's been attacked, and we're going to discuss two of them shortly. But the one thing we posted here about copy and printer access, that's something um, that came to my attention years ago, and I started thinking about it. I realized that a lot of times they'll have the copy vendor for cost recovery software. They'll have persistent access to your system. So even if they're using TeamViewer or whatever the case may be, that means once TeamViewer is exposed and because that access is still there, the bad actor gain access to your system that's managing cost recovery, and then they'll start doing the normal discovery tool and network discovery and everything else. So these systems and tools that we use, you have to make sure, especially for, like, say, for example, the cost recovery software, access should only be granted when required, and if they don't need access to it anymore, it should be disabled. That's the only way you can prevent some of these third-party vendor um, potential access.
And Ernesto, some of these things are simple that you just don't realize. Like you might have a card or door access system to open or unlock the door in the office, and that's an entry point into the suite. Or years ago, I heard of a fish tank that was connected for remote monitoring by the fish tank vendor, and that was exploited and exposed. I know it sounds silly, but you just all these cameras, like there's all these little things that many people don't understand are a risk. They just trust without verifying, right?
Well, I think the security cards, access card systems is key because a lot of times the security vendors don't update their software. So you may have a box in your server room that's managing your access cards, but they're running Windows 7, you know, and Windows 7 is not updated. You know that's vulnerable. Windows 7 is easily hackable. So now you have a device that's managing access to physical access to your system, to your network or to your office. But the vulnerability is there is that once one system gets compromised and they do a network discovery, then now they have access to your security machine. But the key thing is now they have persistent access into your network because
Right.
now they get to just plant themselves and sit there.
Yep. It's a conduit. And look, there's many other third-party vendors, just some of them, but there's just has to give a lot of thought to it as well. So right now we're going to talk about some of the major vendor risks that attacks that have happened. There are many, many others. Some of you may not have heard of, and that's the problem for many of you. You would be overwhelmed and overloaded if you heard of each of these attacks every time. That's why we're here today to uncover and highlight where we're seeing the gaps. So later on, we're going to give you some actual steps to take to help reduce these gaps, but you know, some of these you might not have heard about, some of you might have. The Kaseya attack was ginormous in our industry because many people were left exposed. A company called Enable, Simple Help, we're going to talk about, and Silk Typhoon later on. Log Me In, TeamViewer. TeamViewer is a kind of remote access kind of tool. And what that means is that if, let's say, your copier vendor has a system or your direct system had a TeamViewer on that and you didn't realize it or maybe you changed vendors and you left it open for many years. So that leaves again this conduit into your office. So we're going to talk about this, but there's many, many more exploits. This is happening all the time. And the reason why this is ever growing is because if a hacker can get into tens of thousands of systems at the same time as opposed to one, it makes it they can gain and get and harm a lot more organizations, no matter what the size. Because people say, hey, I'm too small. They're not interested in me. I'm a 20-person law firm or a 100-person law firm. But that's not true. They can get and extract a lot of money from you guys. So let's go a little further now and talk about this one that this is the first one that prompted us to create this webinar, this simple help. But then we're going to talk about one more serious that just popped up on the last week. So Ernesto, explain about Simple Help, what it is. They might not have ever heard about it, but maybe their third-party vendors use this.
So Simple Help is a remote access software. With the latest intel Shodan is a website where it'll scan IPs to determine what type of services are listening and is running on certain external IP addresses. And there's in total worldwide is 3,300, but there's about 1,900 of them running within the United States. So it's just a simple, it's similar to Log Me In. You need remote help. You click on the icon. It's managed by a server. But the problem is with this exploitation is the server that's providing their service is exploited. So what they did was they exploit the server. Now they have full access on that server. And because of the agents that are communicating to it, it can now funnel software down to all your desktops. So what it was doing, it was just going down there, compromising other computer systems, either pushing out ransomware, creating accounts. One of them is saying SQL admin. I guess most bad actors like to use SQL admin for some reason because that's one of the most common accounts they create.
Mhm.
But what they see is they do a network discovery to determine what's out there, what kind of data, sensitive data you may have that they could exfiltrate. And then once they exfiltrate, they encrypt. So and they're going to target law firms because law firms has a lot of sensitive data.
Right.
So that's the key thing here. And not all versions were susceptible to this vulnerability, but the majority of them were. So depending upon the version that we're running is the exploit. But the key thing is sometimes Simple Help provides temporary access and the software is not removed, and that's how you get exfiltrated.
Got it. So for those less technical in the call, what exfiltration means is once the hackers are in your system, they will actually take copies of all the data without you knowing it, and they'll put it on their own servers without you knowing it. Then what they do for good measure is The encryption means that they take the data and put it in a format that you cannot unlock yourself. I can't unlock it. They put it in a format that is locked up, that only they have the keys at that point. So then there's like, hey, you either have, if you have a great restoration process, you can restore the data. But the problem is that even if you restore your own data, at that point, they'll say, no problem, you restored your data, but we have a copy of your data. And they then threaten to expose that data, post on the web. If you've got insurance, they'll make your insurance carrier get involved. Sometimes they'll even ask for your actual insurance policy so they can extort the limit of your policy limits on that. So that's what that tends to mean. Just wanted to break that down in a non-technical manner for those that might not be so facile with the terms we use in our industry. But we're seeing a lot of this, and again, it doesn't matter size. Every law firm, if your data gets exposed, they take a copy, cold exfiltration, and then they will encrypt it. If you've got a great backup, then it doesn't matter because you can restore and still work, but they're still going to threaten to expose that data. So what we're highlighting here is that there are vendor security gaps, create this open door for attackers. There are ways we'll talk about later on with proactive monitoring responses to stop this, but would your firm have caught it? And many firms aren't taking those measures. So we'll talk about that later, what you can do to make sure you stop those before they happen or minimize the risk on that. So, why don't you break this down a little further for what happened here, and then we'll go to the next one.
Sure. So phase one, as you can see here, they exploited initial access, right? So running a specific command against the actual server, they gained full administrative control. So they had full admin access to that server. And because of the tool, the way it works, the remote access tool, they were able to install other tools. Normally the pen testers would use doing a pen testing engagement, or if you do vulnerability scanning, like known tools like Cobalt, Strike, and Metaexploit to look for web services that they could exfiltrate. But the key thing is that the exploitation is the phase two is they are setting up persistent access. So you want permanent access to your systems. And a lot of times the traffic is subtle, so it goes under the radar. So once they have that access, what they do in phase three is they determine, based on the network discovery, can they jump into another computer? They're going to look up, can they connect to your domain controller that manages authentication? What other secondary accounts can they create? They can hide themselves within your Active Directory environment so they continue on their lateral movement. And then phase four, you got attack detection and prevention. I call phase three it is always going to happen. Phase four, we talk about here, flagging unusual activity, is that assuming a breach that you will get compromised at one point in time, what you're going to do to mitigate. That's what phase four, what I talk about on this attack detection and prevention, is because you want to try to prevent that type. You can't stop everything 100%, but once you know that you detect that, you should be able to contain and isolate that device and then determine what has occurred. Just like we had here, you have a managed detected response system, just like Arctivol. It'll flag unusual activity. It'll contain that device from the network, and then it allows you to provide you have time to mitigate. This way, you don't have that exposure of data. And once they try to attempt to make the lateral movement, that computer gets contained. So we're only dealing with one device versus many number of devices.
Right. And that's the term you might hear out there, people, MDR, managed detection, where it detects, and then there's a response by the system to do it, and there's special tools that we use for that. But what Ernesto said earlier is very interesting. The hackers are actually using tools we use to protect networks called penetration test tools, and they're using it to uncover the gaps that you guys should be proactively protecting. And they're saying most people don't do these penetration tests, but the hackers are actually using these tools to say, hey, you guys didn't do a good job, so we're going to look and see what we can exploit. Now, if the law firm had been running these penetration tests continuously, we would have been able to block most of that, and the hackers probably leave the environment without putting anything in there. So that's a good next webinar topic on that, so we can go further on that penetration testing. Let's move on a little bit here. Great. So still Typhoon. This just came up in the last week, and Ernesto, what do the Chinese and hacking have to do with law firms? I want you to talk about that. This is very extremely serious, and not just our government, but all computers in the United States.
Well, the key thing to remember, so Microsoft's threat intelligence team wrote a full blog on this. If
Mhm.
Microsoft writes about a particular group, then we need to pay attention. Um, what they realized is that, when Silk Typhoon was able to successfully compromise a victim, what they did was they stolen keys and credentials to infiltrate the customer's networks. And then what they did was they abused the variety of deployed applications, including Microsoft services and others. So they use legitimate applications to hide their activity. You know, and this group is well funded, state backed. So it means they're sharpest of the sharpest people out there, especially coming from China. So it that's why I say previously that when I stated previously, you cannot protect yourself 100%.
Mhm.
99%, I think most systems can protect you. Because that 1% is when that 1% happens, what is going to be your response? So the key thing about this as well is that they are targeting information technology services and infrastructures. I also read another blog the other day that um, they were in an ISP network for 300 days.
Wow.
I mean, this is an ISP that's providing services to us, right?
Right.
So they're exploiting any zero-day vulnerabilities on any edge device. So anything you have that's is internet facing is a potential exploitation into your network. So the key thing is what protective measures you have in place in protecting those devices. And you
Right.
can't rule out your ISPs as well. So
Right.
the key thing is that when they're attacking, they're using the remote access management tools to deploy. As you can see in the previous slides, all of those exploits from 2000 and above is all has to do with remote management, and that's third-party vendor stuff. That's third-party vendor tools. If you're doing automatic updates on your remote management tool, if that update is compromised, now you gave the bad actor access to your network. So that's the key thing is that they're trying to either gain access to through the remote access tools, and then even through your cloud services as well. Because if they could get access into your network and get access to your privileged access management tool, which we call PAM, or your cloud app providers, then now they have a direct connection to your Microsoft 365 tenant space, and they can start pulling stuff out through information from there through API calls.
Right. And for those that are saying, wow, this is scary, it is scary. It's even scary for us in this industry as well. It should be scary for you. Um, it's not fear mongering, it's reality of what's going on. And when you heard Ernesto say they were in this vendor security system for 300 days, that means that they didn't have the proper scanning of their environment. They didn't have the proper processes in place to detect that. And you know what? There are tools out there that could prevent much of this. You could probably reduce your gaps to 1%, meaning cover 99% of the risks out there. So poor process, poor use of technology or lack thereof creates these risks. And again, they're not necessarily originally start with your risk. They start with the vendor, and that vendor risk then goes into your system and then exposes you. So hence, you've got to protect yourself as much as you can from those third party risks and do what you can to not prevent it, but at least when they get your system to know that they're in the system and how to respond to that risk as well. So,
And Michael, I would like to add
yes,
when we talk about
yep,
third parties, not just remote access tools,
mhm,
look at your firewalls, your VPN connections, because even if you're using VPN, is your VPN protected by MFA? Because
yep,
the VPN software has vulnerabilities, you have to make sure that is updated at a consistent time.
yep.
Any 0 day, we follow a procedure. Any 0 day vulnerability, we're gonna update it within 24 hours.
So
And that's a
Ernesto,
practice you should have. Yes.
that's great. So as we come to the bottom of the hour here, I know people have to go to their, everyone runs to the next thing. How can law firms protect themselves with cybersecurity posture? What you do as a cybersecurity expert and certified expert on this? What are some things they can do?
So some of the things you could do here is have questions for your vendors. One, I typically, if I'm looking at a vendor, I'm going to determine are they ISO certified? Do they have any industry standard certifications? It could be SOC 2 Type 2, SOC 3, whatever the case may be. If they don't, find out which standards they adhere to. Are they doing this CSF? Or are they doing this 800? Whichever one they're following, you want some validation. So typically what I would do is I would have a list of questions that I would ask the vendor. And I would make sure that the key thing is having them answer the questions as I would assume they're going to be honestly answered. But if you have a security standard yourself for the law firm, they need to adhere to your standard. If they don't adhere to your standard and they don't have compensating controls in place, I would think twice what working with that vendor, because you don't want to inadvertently expose yourself, expose the law firm because you decided to bring on a third-party application or a third-party vendor that does not adhere to your standards and they have weak security standards, weak security controls, because then now that's your weak point.
Right. And this is why it's important for firms, especially those smaller firms out there and mid-sized firms and enterprise usually have other standards in place, but to make sure they work with somebody because they might not see all the risks or their internal IT person might not see all the risks, because we do this every day, it's a great way to kind of shift that risk and have somebody else kind of look at what you're doing and give, uh, different ideas of how to approach that risk, how to minimize the risk, and how to reduce the risk out there. So actually, towards that end, um, cyber criminals are really moving super fast here. So that Silk Road thing is really key. That we just saw this week. That's really amped up security out there, and everyone's on their heels with what's going to happen. So are your vendors keeping up? You guys can have the best security in place, but if your vendors have gaps, your firm is still at risk. So what we're doing out here is we want to help the community. We've got Ernesto has volunteered for up to 10 of these to give a free consultation to the first 10 firms to help evaluate their vendor security strategy. And then Ernesto will kind of walk you through your current vendor relationships and identify potential weak spots, practical steps to reduce that risk. And also, as we talked before, about how can you use some of those penetration testing and what we call MDR tools to manage when it does happen for you to see and know about what's going on so that you can stop it or prevent real damage taking place. It's not a sales pitch, but it's about understanding where you stand today and making sure your firm isn't the next headline. We're trying to give back to the industry because that's all we specialize in law firms. So we don't want you to wait till an attack happens. We want you to schedule a consultation. I believe we put up a poll so you can grab a spot, or you can just reach out to me. My name is Michael Glasser, so it's M Glasser, MGLASSER, at frontlinems.com, M Glasser at frontlinems.com. Look, cyber threats are evolving, so your cybersecurity strategy should be too. We're going to leave it here and take some questions for you at this time. So, there happen to be any questions? All right. I don't think we have any questions today. Any questions
Oh,
out there?
right.
Oh,
It looks like one question just came in.
sure.
Would my insurance cover third-party hacks?
Good question, Ernesto. I'm going to let you handle that one.
Okay. I'm not an attorney, but
Well,
no,
actually, I can speak to that, but you
no,
can go.
actually,
Yeah.
so I've seen, so depending upon your cyber insurance policy, because there is a clause in there that will cover for incidents that involve third party. Even, I have questions when people ask about wire fraud or if someone's using their BYD device and the system got compromised. So typically most cyber insurance policies does have clauses in there. So what I would suggest that you um, read the cyber insurance coverage that you have to determine if you're properly covered.
Great. And another quick tip is after you have us help you evaluate these vendor relationships, there might be some we go back to and have you go back to ask them to give you a certification of what coverage they currently have in place and that they maintain certain coverage to provide supplemental insurance or, so you know that they're providing protection on their end, that they're insured as well. That's another good way to help because, again, your insurance might or might not cover it, but it was a great question, actually.
And one of the things, excellent question, yes. As part of the security assessment, one of the things we like to look at is your cyber insurance to see if your coverage is technically enough for what we're seeing out there in the wild.
Yeah.
Because what people don't realize is that when you're looking at an incident, it's not just the cost of the recovery. You have the cost of lost revenue because if you're billing per hour. If you look at if you look at the paralegals, the legal secretaries, the attorneys, that's lost revenue. So how do you capture that revenue? And then you may have to purchase new software or whatever the case may be. So the cost of the recovery is not just paying that ransom and not just recovery costs. There's other costs involved when you have an incident that you really don't pay attention to, even like the forensic analysis is being done. All that stuff for having the breach attorney, all those costs adds up. So a bad actor may only ask for $300,000, but by the time you're done, your entire recovery came up to over $1 million. You just want to make sure that the cyber insurance company can cover it for that.
Yep, very easily. That's a good point there. So I don't think is there any other questions? All
It
right,
doesn't look like any other questions. I think that's all of them.
great. Well, thanks for being here today. We hope we respected your time and the half hour we had today, and it was great value for you. Appreciate that. Would love feedback. Glasser at frontlinems.com. Ernesto, great partnering with you again to do this, and look forward to
Likewise.
seeing everyone again for the next one. So thank you, and have a great day, everyone.
Have a great day, everyone.